The sound reached me before the cold did. A single thud against the old mailbox at the end of my gravel drive, sharp enough to cut through the stillness of a Montana morning. I knew that sound. It didn't belong to bills or delivery flyers. It belonged to something placed by hand, and placed with purpose. The snow was fresh, untouched, except for one set of footprints leading up to the mailbox, and stopping there, no return trail, no tire marks, nothing but a single line of prints ending in the middle of the cold. My breath caught. I opened the mailbox and saw an envelope curled at the edges, the paper trembling slightly in the wind. The handwriting hit me like a hard punch to the ribs, strong loops, heavy pressure. The same tilted T my father used his whole life. My father who'd been buried 15 years ago. My hand shook. Not from the cold. From the kind of wrong you can feel in your bones before you understand it in your mind. Some injustices arrive quietly. Some knock once and wait. I closed my fingers around the envelope, and right there in the silence of my own front yard, I made myself a promise. This time I won't look away. The sound reached me before the cold did. A single thud against the old mailbox at the end of my gravel drive, sharp enough to cut through the stillness of a Montana morning. The first snow had settled overnight, blanketing the yard in a thin sheet that glittered under a sky the color of dull steel. I stepped outside with a mug of reheated coffee steam, rising just enough to remind me I had forgotten to brew a fresh pot again. My boots cracked through a crust of ice as I walked toward the mailbox. It was a simple ritual, something I did without thinking yet that morning. Something tightened in my chest with each step. The wind carried the faint smell of diesel from the barn and brushed against my collar like an unwelcome warning. The mailbox creaked when I pulled it open. Inside lay a single envelope, pale and thin, curled slightly at the edges, as if it had been held for a long time before being dropped there. I reached for it, but my hand paused, halfway suspended in the cold air. For a moment I felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. I lifted the envelope carefully. The handwriting hit me like a blow. Strong loops, heavy pressure, the familiar slant on the T that my father always made when he wrote too fast. My throat tightened. For years I had avoided looking at anything in his old toolbox because the notes he scribbled on yellow pads still carried that same unmistakable hand. Now it stared up at me from an envelope that shouldn't exist. My father had been dead for 15 years, or at least I had lived as though he was. I held the envelope to my palm. It felt faintly warm, as if whoever delivered it had only just walked away. I didn't open it right away. I stood there in the cold breath fogging, watching the wind push thin lines of snow across the drive. Part of me hoped I had misread the handwriting. Another part prayed I hadn't. When I finally tore the envelope open, the paper inside was only half a page. The ink had bled slightly on the left edge, the way it always did when my father pressed the pen too hard. Son, forgive me. Do not believe everything they told you. 42-901 Woven, N106 4412, W. Night before Thanksgiving. There is more you need to know. And at the very bottom in smaller letters, almost hesitant. I never truly left you. A tremor moved through my hands. Not fear exactly, and not relief either. Something between the two, something deeper. I folded the note once, then opened it again, as if the words might change on the second reading. They didn't. I walked back toward the house slowly, the boards of the porch groaning beneath my weight. Inside the kitchen was dim. A single bulb hummed above the table, casting a warm circle of light over the wood I had sanded myself almost 2 decades earlier. On the far wall hung a photograph I rarely looked at. My father standing behind me, one hand on my shoulder, both of us squinting into the sun on a summer morning that felt impossibly distant now. I set the letter on the table next to my coffee mug. The mug was chipped at the rim, stained from years of strong brews. I lifted it out of habit, took a sip, and grimaced at the bitterness. The room felt too quiet, as if waiting for me to speak first. Something in the handwriting pulled me backward. I could see my father sitting at the kitchen counter long ago writing a grocery list with the same uneven pressure. He had a peculiar habit of drawing a short line through the number 7 something he picked up on the rigs because the stencils on the clipboards were old and got smudged easily. The 7 in the coordinates on the letter had that same line, that same stubborn tilt. No one could have forged that. I touched the edge of the note again. My thumb traced the curves almost unconsciously. A memory rose that I wasn't ready for. My father's voice telling me to hold the wrench steady, the smell of gasoline on his jacket, the last argument we had when I was 17 and too angry for my own good. The way he looked at me that night, not with frustration, with something like worry. The casket had been sealed, chemical contamination, they said, federal regulation, no exceptions. We were told it was unsafe to open, unsafe to see what was left of him. Back then, I accepted it because grief dulls the edges of questions you're not ready to ask. But even at the funeral, something felt off. The casket was too clean, too light, too final. I picked up the letter again. The words blurred for a moment before settling back into focus. The coordinates fixed themselves in my mind. Wyoming. The state I had driven out of years ago with the promise I would never return unless it was absolutely necessary. I stayed standing for a long time. The house had a way of amplifying silence, especially on cold mornings. A draft slipped through the window frame and brushed past my shoulder. I turned instinctively, half expecting someone to be standing there. No one was. My hands curled around the edges of the note. My pulse drummed in my ears. I didn't tell myself what the letter meant. I didn't speak the possibility out loud. Some things lose their shape when you name them too soon. Instead, I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out an old duffel bag. I filled it with clothes, thick socks, the jacket that still held a faint scent of pine from last winter. I moved quietly, as if trying not to wake something sleeping in the walls. The house seemed to watch me pack. The ticking of the clock grew louder. I caught sight of my father's old leather gloves on the shelf near the door. I had kept them without knowing why. Maybe this was the reason. When I stepped outside again, the cold felt sharper, cutting close to the bone. I crossed the yard with the duffel slung over my shoulder. The F-150 sat waiting, old but dependable, its paint chipped and dulled from years of Montana winters. I climbed in and started the engine. The truck shuddered, then steadied, warming slowly as the heater struggled against the cold. I slipped my hand into the inside pocket of my coat and felt the letter there folded tight. It rested against my chest like a second heartbeat. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as I left the driveway. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, though I glanced once in the rearview mirror. The house stood quiet behind me, a small shape against the pale morning holding the life I knew until today. I didn't say anything as I drove. I didn't need to. The silence inside the cab was enough. It told me the truth I wasn't ready to admit. I was heading toward Wyoming, toward the coordinates on the page, toward a man I had buried with my own hands. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel alone in the truck. The highway curved through the mountains like a pale ribbon, the snow shifting across it in restless patterns that came and went with the wind. The heater in the truck worked hard, but could not keep up with the cold. I watched my breath fog faintly near the windshield a thin reminder that whatever warmth I carried inside me was working its way out. The farther south I drove, the heavier the smell of diesel became, as if Wyoming was announcing itself long before I crossed the state line. That scent had lived in my memory since childhood, stitched into the evenings, when my father came home from the rigs with oil on his hands and fatigue in his eyes. Each mile pulled more of that past to the surface, quiet but insistent, like a voice I had tried to forget. Casper appeared through the haze, just as the day began to fade. The lights were dim, scattered small against the winter sky. Snow clung to the rooftops and telephone wires. A freight train groaned somewhere in the distance, the kind of sound that let you know this place had not changed much since the day I left. Frank's neighborhood lay at the edge of town. Older homes with sagging porches and wind chimes that clattered even when the air stood still. I parked under a flickering street lamp. The light buzzed steady, then dimmed, then brightened again, as if unsure whether to keep shining. I paused before getting out of the truck. The letter inside my coat pressed against me, warm from the long drive. I touched it once before stepping into the snow. My boots sank with a soft crunch. A newspaper stiff from the cold drifted across the yard and caught on a fence post. The porch light above Frank's door glowed a dull yellow. I knocked lightly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard the scrape of a lock and the whine of hinges that needed oil. Frank stood there backlit by the dim kitchen light. He had aged more than I expected. His shoulders had rounded his hair, pulled thin, and there was something skittish in the way he held the door, as if he had been waiting for someone else. He looked at me for a long breath before stepping aside. I walked in. The house smelled of boiled coffee dust and the faint trace of cold air seeping under the door frames. A jacket hung on the back of a chair, pockets stretched as if stuffed hurriedly. A lamp near the hallway was on, but too dim to be useful, its shade slightly crooked. Frank's voice came low. "You drove all this way in one day?" I nodded and slipped the letter from my coat. I placed it on the table slowly. He stared at it. His face lost what little color it had. His hand hovered above the envelope, but never touched it. "Where did you find that?" he whispered. "Mailbox this morning." He sat down hard, the chair legs scraping against the floor. For a long moment, he only breathed. The wind rattled the window again, and he flinched, a small but telling movement. His eyes flicked toward the front door, as if checking it was still locked. After the explosion, he said they came to every house. Representatives they called themselves. Said the company wanted to take care of us. They brought papers. A fund for victim families. Monthly checks. Promises that things would get better. But the papers were thick. Too thick for what they claimed they were. I watched him press his thumb against the table edge, grinding it back and forth. His breathing was uneven. "I did not read the whole thing, Mike. I just signed. Everyone signed. We were tired. Your father was gone. We did what they wanted." He shook his head and stared at the floor. Guilt settled heavily around him like another layer of winter. "Your mother did not trust any of it. She kept asking questions. She talked to lawyers. She wanted an independent investigation. Then one morning she left early to visit someone on the other side of town. They found her car off the highway. Ice on the road, they said. No skid marks, no questions." He paused. I saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. They closed the file in 2 days. She never believed the official story. And I think they knew that. I walked to the window. The street outside was empty except for the blowing snow. A pickup rumbled somewhere far away, engine muffled by the wind. The glass felt cold under my fingertips. Frank breathed out slowly, as if preparing to hand over something he had kept buried. Your father came to me once, long before the funeral. He left something behind. Told me to give it to you if something ever felt wrong. I kept it locked up because I did not know what it meant, and maybe because I did not want to know. He opened a drawer and brought out a small, folded scrap of paper. His hand shook lightly as he set it in front of me. I unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father's. The pressure in the strokes, the slight tilt of the numbers, and near the bottom, tight and hurried. Trust no one, not even family. The room went still. I felt something pull at me, a mix of anger and grief and disbelief so tangled I could not name it. I looked at Frank. His eyes had drifted to the window, watching the street, as if expecting someone to appear. He spoke without looking at me. I do not know who to fear anymore. Maybe I should have told you sooner. Maybe I waited too long. I tucked the scrap of paper into my coat. I did not answer. I did not trust my voice enough to speak. The silence between us grew heavy, stretching across the small kitchen like another presence. I stood and walked toward the door. Frank called my name once, soft and uncertain. I paused, but did not turn around. The floor creaked under his weight as he shifted, but he said nothing more. I stepped out into the cold. The wind swept across the yard, carrying loose snow in thin sheets. The porch light flickered. I walked toward the truck and felt the weight of the letters, the numbers, the secrets pressing against me from inside my coat. As I pulled the door open, a car passed slowly at the end of the street. Its headlights slid across the houses and vanished. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. Wyoming had a way of making small things feel larger than they were. I sat behind the wheel with my hands on the cold steering wheel. The house behind me fell dark as Frank turned off the light. The street lamp buzzed once, then steadied. I breathed in the cold air and let it settle inside me. Then I started the engine. The road ahead waited quiet and endless. The prairie opened wide as morning crept in a pale wash of light, stretching over miles of frozen grass. The road beneath my tires vibrated faintly, as if echoing something unsettled in me. The air smelled of iron and old winter, the kind that lingered long after the snow had stopped falling. I drove past a line of bare cottonwoods, their branches thin and brittle against the sky, and felt the cold reach through the cab each time the wind shifted. The coordinates led me to a chain-link gate, leaning slightly to one side. A faded sign hung from it, swinging gently with the wind. I stepped out of the truck and closed the door behind me. The metal clicked in the quiet, too sharp for the empty landscape. A narrow gravel path stretched toward a run-down office shed. I could see a thin line of smoke rising from inside the scent of burning dust carried on the cold air. The man in the shed looked up when I entered. His wool cap sat crooked on his head, and the heater by his feet glowed a tired orange. He studied me without speaking, the lines on his face deepened by years of wind and silence. When I told him the number I was looking for, he frowned slightly, as though remembering something unpleasant. "That one has been paid for a long time," he said, his voice raspy. "No one comes for it?" He found the key in a drawer cluttered with old receipts and dried-out pens. He placed it in my hand, his fingers lingering for a second too long, as if passing more than metal. There was something in his eyes, not quite curiosity, not quite warning, but a mixture of both. I stepped outside. The wind pressed against my coat, carrying grains of old snow that skittered across the gravel. Rows of storage units stretched out in front of me, each door marked with numbers that had faded under years of sun. Unit 17 waited near the center, a rusted rectangle in a place meant to be forgotten. The key hesitated in the lock before turning. I lifted the door and felt the cold inside roll out like breath, leaving a long, sealed room. Dust drifted through the air, catching the dim morning light. The unit smelled faintly of oil and paper, as if time had been stored here too. A metal cabinet stood against the right wall. Its door creaked when I pulled it open, revealing shelves filled with the kind of things a man keeps when he is preparing for the moment no one expects. 6 cassette tapes were lined in a neat row, each labeled with a date written in my father's heavy hand. A notebook sat beneath them, worn at the edges, its cover softened by years of use. I lifted it carefully. The pages whispered under my thumb, filled with diagrams, warnings, lists of problems ignored too long. Beside the notebook hung a large map tacked to the inside of the cabinet door. Pins marked old North Star rigs and supply points. 2 pins stood out sharply. One rested exactly where my house sat on the Montana map. The other near Danny's university. I stared at them, feeling the cold press deeper, tighter. Something tightened in my stomach, a quiet pull I could not shake. I reached for the tapes. The plastic was chilled yet faintly warm near the center, as if someone had held them recently. I found an old cassette player tucked in the cabinet, flimsy and scratched. When I pressed the power button, the light flickered weakly, but it came on. I slid in the first tape. For a moment, there was only static, then a faint clatter, followed by a breath drawn too slowly. My father's voice emerged, cracked at the edges, carrying the sound of someone speaking in a room too empty. If you found this, then I did not make it back. I stood very still. The unit seemed to shrink around me, the air thickening. He spoke of the rig that day, of alarms blinking red against a sky already heavy with wind of pressure, climbing faster than it should. His voice shook slightly when he said he saw the danger coming, but told himself he could push through. He said something about the project falling behind schedule, supervisors leaning hard on them for a deadline. He admitted he chose to move forward anyway. His breath caught when he spoke of the men who died. 11 in total. 11 families who never received answers. For a moment, the tape grew silent, except for the faint hum of the recorder. Then the sound of wind drifted through, as if he had stepped near a window while speaking. He continued. When he woke, he said he was in a clinic far from the site. No one from the company came. No one asked who he was. They had already written the story they wanted. Identification was rushed, records sealed, families hurried through their grief. Only one safety engineer knew he survived. The man told him to run before the narrative solidified. Fear weighed heavy in his voice. Fear and guilt. The tape ended with a sharp click. The silence that followed felt fuller than sound. I set the recorder down and pressed my palms against my knees. My breath fogged the cold air in front of me. I remembered the way my father used to clear his throat before giving instructions. The scraped tone in the recording was different, but the cadence was the same. It was him. There was no question. I lifted the notebook again, running my thumb along the edge. A faint stain darkened the corner of one page, something that looked like old coffee. I remembered mornings when he drank from a mug chipped at the rim, steam rising as he studied charts for a job he never talked much about. For a moment I heard the echo of that mug hitting our kitchen table, a small sound that had gone missing from my life for far too long. I gathered the tapes, the notebook, and the map. As I loaded them into a cardboard box, I found in the corner something outside caught my attention. The faint crunch of tires on gravel. I froze. Through the narrow opening of the unit door, I saw a pickup creeping past the end of the row, its headlights off. The windows were dark, the engine barely audible. The truck moved slowly, paused for a heartbeat, then eased forward until it slipped out of sight. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with winter. I waited until the sound disappeared. Only the wind remained, brushing weakly against the metal walls. I closed the cabinet door, lowered the storage unit door, and locked it. Then I carried the box to the truck, setting it gently in the passenger seat. My hands were numb when I gripped the steering wheel. As I sat there, the morning light thinned behind a bank of clouds. The box beside me shifted slightly as the heater blew warm air across it. Inside were pieces of a story I had never asked to inherit, a truth that pressed against me with quiet weight. I rested my hand on the lid for a long moment, feeling the cardboard tremble with the hum of the engine. Then I pulled out of the storage yard, the prairie stretching wide and silent around me, and let the road take me wherever the truth waited next. The heater in the truck let out a low hum as I drove back toward town, the box of tapes and papers shifting slightly with each turn. The sky had turned a pale silver over the plains, and the cold seemed to seep through the glass, even with the vents blowing warm air. My hands rested on the wheel the same way they had earlier that morning, but something inside me had settled into a heavier rhythm, a pulse shaped by names and dates and a voice from a tape that should not have existed. Casper rose ahead through a curtain of fog, familiar in the way places from childhood become familiar only when you least want them to be. Small shops with their lights dimmed for the morning rows of trucks idling in front of diners, the scent of bacon and diesel drifting together in the air. I turned down a quiet street near the courthouse, where the buildings sat close, and the windows reflected the color of the cold. Linda Hayes kept her office in a low brick structure with a single lamp glowing behind the blinds. I got out of the truck, and the wind carried a faint smell of snow that had not yet fallen. The sidewalk felt solid and cold under my boots. When I opened the door, a bell chimed softly, the kind of sound you only hear in places where time never feels rushed. Inside, the air was warm. Not cozy, just lived in. Shelves were filled with binders and worn books. A couple of framed certificates hung behind a wooden desk, scarred by years of work. A coat was draped over the back of a chair, and a lamp on the corner cast the room in a muted gold. Linda stepped out from a side door, adjusting her glasses as she looked at me. Her face held a quiet recognition, the kind that says she already knows more than she is willing to admit. Her voice was steady when she greeted me, but there was a thread of caution woven through it, thin and unmistakable. She invited me to sit. I lowered myself into the chair, the fabric firm and familiar, like old courthouse seating. I placed the envelope with my father's letter on her desk. She reached for it carefully, almost as if it might crumble under her touch. When she saw the handwriting, something flickered in her expression. Not surprise. More like disappointment returning after too many years away. I told her what I had found. The tapes, the notebook, the map, the storage unit that had waited longer than it should have. Her eyes narrowed slightly the way a person looks when an old wound begins to ache again. Without speaking, she opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder stamped with my mother's name. The sight of it made my chest tighten. I rested my hand on the edge of the desk, steadying myself, and felt a small tremor run through my fingers. My mother used to keep her papers in neat stacks, always clipped together, always in order. The folder in front of me was worn, the corners bent, as if it had been opened many times when no one was watching. Linda slid the accident report across the desk. I scanned the thin pages. It was too brief, too clean. No inspection, no skid analysis. A single sentence about ice on the road, a signature at the bottom that seemed to close the door on everything she ever suspected. She said my mother came to her a week before the crash. Helen believed someone was shadowing her movements. She believed the USB drive she carried full of documents from my father was the reason. She had given it to Linda for safekeeping, but it disappeared from the car before any official report was finished. The police had shrugged. The case was closed in the time it takes most families to process shock. Linda spoke in a quiet voice, the kind people use when they no longer expect justice, but still respect the dead. North Star had a pattern, she said. People who tried to speak often found themselves overwhelmed by lawyers, by settlements, by silence. Some walked away with money. Others walked away with their fear. Only my father had kept fighting until he vanished, and when he did, the noise stopped. I looked at the photograph on her desk, while she talked a picture of her much younger shaking hands with a family outside a courthouse. She had the same calm expression, then the same resolve. I wondered how many fights she had lost, and how many she had carried home like bruises no one else could see. She closed the folder gently and rested her hand on it, covering my mother's name. The gesture struck something deep in me. For a moment I saw my mother at our kitchen table, sorting bills, humming under her breath, unaware of the world closing in around her. That small, simple memory hit harder than anything on the tapes. I stood. The legs of the chair made a soft sound against the floor. Linda rose with me, though her shoulders seemed heavier than when I first arrived. She looked at me with the tired clarity of someone who has watched too many truths go unanswered. As I reached for the door, her phone rang from the desk behind her. She hesitated, then answered. A silence stretched across the room while she listened. A silence thick enough to feel in my spine. When she hung up, she stepped closer. "They know you are in Casper." There was no fear in her voice, only a knowledge shaped by years of seeing how corporate shadows fall across a town like this. Her warning was not dramatic, not theatrical. Just real. Real enough to keep people alive. I nodded once. There was nothing else to say. She held my gaze for a moment, and in that brief silence I saw what she was not saying. She had been fighting this long before I walked through her door, and she would continue long after I left. Outside, the cold wrapped around me again. The fog had thinned, revealing a truck idling far down the street. Its windows were dark. The engine pulsed faintly through the quiet. I could not tell if it watched me, or if I had stepped so deep into this thing that every shadow now felt personal. I got into my truck. The heater blew a thin stream of warm air. My breath fogged the glass before clearing. I rested one hand on the box beside me, the cardboard soft beneath my palm. For a moment, I let the engine idle, listening to the soft tick of cooling metal from a car parked somewhere behind me. Then I shifted into gear and eased onto the empty street, the tires cracking through the thin ice. Casper faded behind me as the road unwound in the pale winter light, carrying me toward answers I was no longer sure I wanted, but knew I could not turn away from. The heater in the cab was still fighting the cold when the phone began to ring again. I let it buzz once, then twice, thinking it was another robocall, or Linda trying to ease her own worry. But the name on the screen caught me in a way I was not prepared for. My fingers tightened on the wheel before I could stop them, a quiet tremor running through my hand, as if the truck had slipped on black ice. 2 years of silence, and suddenly his name was glowing in the dark. I answered without thinking, breath caught halfway in my throat. The sound of his voice filled the cab, older and rougher than I remembered, like he had lived a different lifetime in the months we spent apart. There was no greeting, only a clipped line asking if I was driving. I told him yes, and he repeated himself slower this time, as if the wind on his end kept pulling his words away. He said the university had frozen his accounts. Housing, tuition, access to campus systems all locked without warning. An anonymous packet had shown up at their office, and someone decided it was reason enough to shut everything down. He said it like he was reading off a form, but there was strain under the words, the kind a young man tries to hide when he refuses to let fear show. I asked him what the packet claimed. The sound he made in response was somewhere between a laugh and a breath of disbelief. He said they accused him of falsifying aid information, of misreporting financial status, of trying to cheat the system. Things he knew nothing about, things he would never dare to do. Then he went quiet, long enough for me to hear the echo of whatever room he was standing in, the fluorescent hum that always made dorm halls feel a little lonely. I told him I did not know who sent it. He told me I did. Not in anger, just in the kind of tired certainty that cuts deeper than shouting. The truth sat between us like another person on the line. He said he wanted to hear something real for once. The phrase came out soft, almost whispered, and it hit me harder than if he had yelled. I felt the old wound open just a little, the same one we never managed to close the day we last spoke. There was a silence long enough for both of us to hear our own breathing. He broke it by asking if his grandfather was dead or alive. No warning, no hesitation, just the question that had been building from the moment he called. I felt my grip on the wheel, shift my thumb, pressing hard into the worn leather like I needed something solid to hold on to. The tape box on the passenger seat slid with the turn of the road, the cassettes rattling inside like loose bones. I told him I did not want to lie to him. He told me he was tired of being lied to. Then he said he was driving to Montana. Tonight. Not tomorrow. Not after he talked to administration. Tonight. He said he was done piecing the truth together from whispers and strangers. If his grandfather was out there, or dead, or somewhere in between, he wanted to hear it from me. I started to tell him the roads were getting bad. He cut me off gently, almost apologetic, saying he would take it slow. He said he was not a kid anymore. I did not answer that. A man can be 24 and still be walking in the dark without knowing it. I heard the rustle of keys, the shift of a door, the muffled thud of wind as he stepped outside. He paused before hanging up long enough for me to think he might take it back. He did not. He said he hoped I would be home when he arrived. His voice thinned on the last word, not breaking, just stretching in that way hurt sometimes does. The line went quiet. The road ahead narrowed into a ribbon of gray under the weak afternoon light. I felt something settle in the truck, a change in air or pressure, the way a room feels just after someone leaves. I reached to turn up the heater, but my hand stayed in midair for a second, caught by the thought of him alone on a highway with a storm rolling in. The hum of the engine filled the space he left behind. Snow tapped against the windshield like small, hurried fingers. I drove with both hands steady on the wheel, but every few miles I found myself glancing at the empty passenger seat, imagining him there, with the same stubborn eyes he inherited from me. When the first flake of heavier snow drifted across the glass, I eased the truck back to the center of the lane. I kept listening for my phone, even after I knew it would not ring again. The road curved gently north, the sky dimming in slow degrees, and the silence in the cab grew heavier than the cold. I did not speak a word, But somewhere inside, a prayer began forming on its own. Not elegant, not polished, just a father asking the dark to spare his son for one more night. The heater clicked softly as it shifted to a higher setting. The sound lingered in the quiet, and then faded, leaving only the low murmur of the road beneath me. The forest thickened the farther I went, the truck pushing past drifts of snow that rose almost to the bumper. The numbers from Frank's note replayed in my mind until they felt less like coordinates and more like a whisper I was following through the trees. The heater hummed weakly, fighting a cold that seemed to seep through metal and glass, and every mile carried the weight of something waiting ahead that I could not yet name. I lost the signal twice on the way into the mountains. The map froze, blinked back, then died again under the heavy sky. I kept moving by instinct, watching for anything that matched the shape of the land on the last saved screen. A bend in the frozen creek, a cluster of pines leaning inward as if huddled for warmth. After an hour of searching, the cabin revealed itself in a narrow break between the trees, the roof sagging, the wood gray and soft with age. The silence there felt different, thick, and almost watchful. I stepped out, boots sinking through crusted snow, each breath slipping away in pale ribbons. My hand brushed against a branch near the door, and a small torn scrap of flannel caught my thumb. It was old sun, faded and torn at the edge, like a sleeve ripped by time or work. It was the kind of small sign only someone who knew the man would understand. It steadied me and unsettled me at the same time. The cabin door resisted, then opened with a low groan. Warmth did not greet me, only the stale weight of years sealed behind wood. My eyes adjusted slowly. A lantern sat on a table, the flame inside faint and low, barely clinging to the wick. Its glow brushed over a jacket hanging from a nail, the same Carhartt my father used to shrug on every winter morning. There was a notch on the left sleeve where he once tore it on a fence post. Seeing it now felt like catching sight of a ghost that had learned how to breathe again. The engraved lighter rested beside the lantern, its metal dulled and scratched. It sat near a ring left by a cup that had been moved only recently. On the far shelf stood a framed photo from 2005. My mother's smile, my father's uneasy stance, Danny's small hand gripping my arm as if he feared being left out of the frame. I lifted the picture and felt a pressure rise in my chest. Not fast, just steady, like the first swell of a tide you know is coming for you. I stared at it long enough for the room to fade. Then a voice behind me broke the stillness. "Did not think you would find it." I turned frame, still in my hands. He stood in the doorway, smaller than the man in my memory, shoulders bowed, breath thin like it had to fight its way out of him. His hair had gone to gray. His cheeks had hollowed, but the eyes were the same. Blue, steady, almost stubborn. For a moment, my body moved before my mind did. I stepped toward him half a step, then stopped. I did not know if I had the right to bridge that distance or if he had the right to let me. He noticed. His own hand shifted as if he wanted to meet mine, then fell slightly hanging loose at his side. He told me he had not expected the letter to reach me, that he had written it on a night when the pain was worse than the fear. He moved further inside and sat slowly lowering himself with the caution of someone who had learned that sudden motions come with a cost. He spoke of small towns and night shifts, of trying to live without leaving tracks. He told me about the diagnosis, saying it without drama, the words landing heavy in the air between us. Stage 4. The chemicals, he said, had caught up with him after all these years. He said it like a man admitting something he had always known would return someday. When he mentioned my mother, his gaze slipped past me, settling on the lantern flame. He said she had carried the USB everywhere. She believed truth mattered. He paused, then swallowing a breath that did not quite make it. He said he searched for proof of foul play, but never found what he needed. Only hints. Only shadows. Only the feeling that she had not been alone the night the road took her. I felt my jaw tighten. I did not speak. There was nothing to say that would not break something open too fast. Outside, snow shifted. A soft crunch, then another deliberate and slow, the kind of sound that makes your chest stiffen. Light passed across the window in a slow arc, sweeping the walls in pale reflection. My father straightened slightly. I turned toward the door, every muscle held, still listening. When it opened, the cold swept in first, followed by a man shaking snow from his coat. The badge on his belt caught the dim lantern glow. Special Agent Luke Harrison. He nodded at me, then at my father, then said Linda had given him the coordinates because she feared people with fewer rules might reach us before he could. My father let out a tired breath, a sound almost too soft to notice. His shoulders lowered. Something in him unclenched, not relief exactly, but resignation. The kind that comes from knowing a long road has finally run out of turns. He looked at me, not the agent. His voice was quiet when he said we would have to face what came next. He did not ask if I would stand with him. He simply said it as if the years apart had not changed the shape of that truth. The lantern flickered the flame, bending as a draft touched it. Snow brushed against the window in slow, wandering spirals. My father rested one hand on the table to steady himself. His fingers trembled near the lighter, not from fear, but from the weight of everything he had carried alone. I let the silence close in around us. It pressed against my ears, against my ribs, against whatever part of me was still deciding whether to step closer or further away. The room held still, suspended between the past that would not let go and the truth waiting outside in the snow. The lantern dimmed, shrinking to a thin, trembling glow. Then it steadied just enough to show his eyes meeting mine. His eyes were still on mine when Luke said we should move. The lantern hummed faintly, the flame trembling in the glass, and for a second I wanted to stay in that dim cabin and pretend the world outside had ended 15 years ago. Instead, I watched my father push himself up from the chair, one hand anchored to the table, shoulders tightening with the effort. I stepped forward on instinct, half a step ready to steady him, then stopped again, unsure if I had earned the right to do it. He caught that pause. A shadow of something passed across his face. Regret or understanding, maybe both. Then he reached for the back of the chair instead, and made his way to the door. Snow had picked up again. The wind carried it in slow sheets that swirled under the truck stoplights when we finally pulled off the highway. The diner sat low beside the gas station, its windows glowing a tired yellow against the gray morning. A row of long haul rigs idled near the edge of the lot, engines, rumbling softly, clouds of exhaust rising and fading into the low ceiling of clouds. Inside, the air smelled of burned coffee and fried eggs that had cooled on plates. A radio murmured somewhere behind the counter, too soft to make out the words. We took a metal table by the window, the kind that let the cold creep up from underneath. My father sat with his back to the wall, a habit from another life, hands folded on the table fingers like thin branches. Luke set a thick folder down, then the box I had carried from the truck. He had dark circles under his eyes, the look of someone who had read too many things that did not change fast enough. He said Linda had sent him copies of what she held the old emails, early complaints letters from my father that never went anywhere. He had listened to one of the tapes already. His jaw tightened slightly as he said that part. He opened the folder and slid a few pages toward us. These were federal. He said, his tone steady, not proud, not defensive, just factual. The North Star investigation had started and then stalled. They had statements, internal warnings, hints of pressure on safety. Then someone higher up decided there were other priorities. The file was never closed, just buried under new ones. The way he said buried carried more weight than the word itself. I looked at the paper, but saw faces instead. Men from the rig. My mother reading forms at the kitchen table. My father signing his name the first time before any of us understood what those signatures would cost. Luke asked for the box. I pushed it toward him, the cardboard scraping softly on metal. He lifted the tapes, the notebook, the map. He handled them with care, like they were evidence and confession all at once. He said slowly that with this and my father sitting here breathing, they could pull the case back into the light. Not guaranteed, he added, but enough to make people answer questions. He reached into another folder and took out a shorter document. It was not thick, just a few pages clipped at the corner. He laid a pen beside it. This is not the full process, he explained. It is preliminary consent. It lets us start the paperwork to bring you into protection. Relocation. New name if we need it. First, we need you on the record saying you will testify. After that, other people finish what we started at this table. My father listened, shoulders, still eyes lowered for a moment to the words on the page. I watched his hand as it moved toward the pen. It trembled more than it had in the cabin. He paused, halfway. Fingers hovering, then pulled his hand back an inch, as if the weight of the decision had hit him all at once. He looked at me. Son, I am tired of running. His voice scratched the air between us, hoarse but sure. For a heartbeat, every sound in the diner seemed to fade. The clink of dishes, the shuffle of boots on the tile, even the low rumble of the trucks outside all slipped to the edge of my hearing. I wanted to tell him not to do it, that this would paint a target where there had only been shadows, that I had just found him again, and the idea of losing him a second time felt like too much. The words rose, pressed against my teeth, and stopped there. I saw my mother in my mind standing at the sink with a dish towel in her hands, telling him once that you either live with truth or you live with excuses. I saw Danny on a dark highway driving north because he was done with half answers. My father took the pen. He signed. The line wavered near the end, the old firmness disappearing into a tremor, but the name was still his. When he slid the paper back, I felt something in my chest loosen and tighten at the same time. The bell above the door chimed. A gust of cold air slipped in before it closed. A man in a thin brown coat stepped inside. He paused just beyond the door, eyes moving quickly over the tables until they stopped at ours. There was a moment when he looked like he might turn and leave. Instead, he walked over each step, measured like a man approaching the edge of a high ledge. He sat down without waiting to be asked. His hands were shaking visibly now, the kind of tremor that does not come from age, but from years of pushing fear down so deep it has nowhere left to go except into the body. He greeted my father without looking directly at him, then forced himself to meet his eyes. He said he had been the one who pulled my father out of the wreckage, that he had watched the company twist the story until it no longer resembled the truth, that he had taken their offer of silence and money because he had a wife and 2 small kids at home and was not brave enough to risk them. Every word came slowly, like each one cost him something to say. He said he was tired of it now, tired of waking up at night hearing the alarms, tired of driving past the old site with his jaw clenched, tired of folding himself smaller every time he saw an article call it an unavoidable accident. I watched my father listen. His eyes did not harden. If anything, they softened, and it hurt more to see that than it would have to see anger. Luke took brief notes, then closed his pad. He said what he needed from both of them was clear. The system would move slowly, he warned, but it would move. He lifted the box, the folders, the signed form, stacking them with the kind of care you give to something more fragile than it looks. When he stepped away to make a call near the register, the noise of the diner returned, but I felt like we were sitting in a separate room. I realized my hand had been clenched on the edge of the table. I forced my fingers to relax. Blood rushed back into them with a dull ache. My father reached into his pocket. He pulled out the engraved lighter and turned it in his palm. Then he slid it across the table until it bumped gently against my knuckles. I looked at him. He did not say anything. He did not have to. That lighter had clicked through 1,000 nights of his thinking. It had sat on our kitchen table next to unpaid bills and half-finished coffee. Now it sat between us as something passed from one pair of hands to another. I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should have. Outside, Luke finished his call. A semi rolled past on the highway, the growl of its engine washing over the building and fading toward the open road. The sky held to its low gray, but a thin seam of lighter color showed near the horizon like the start of a break that had not fully formed. When it was time for my father to leave with Luke, I stood. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I stepped forward and put my arms around him. His body felt 2 slight bones and fabric where once there had been strength I pushed against in younger days. He hesitated as if unsure he was allowed this, then wrapped one arm around my back with what force he had left. I felt my throat close. My eyes burned. There were things I wanted to say, questions about the years he had missed, apologies. I owed him apologies. He owed me. None of them found their way out. All I managed was a breath that hitched somewhere between us. He pulled back first. His hand stayed on my shoulder a moment longer, fingers pressing gently, as if to prove to himself I was solid. Then he turned and walked toward the door with Luke at his side. I stepped outside a few moments later. The cold reached for me immediately, crisp and full. Trucks idled near the pumps. A car I did not recognize sat at the far end of the lot engine off a figure behind the wheel, not moving. I watched it for a while. It never pulled closer, never drove away, just sat there, part of the landscape or something more. I clicked the lighter in my hand out of habit, then stopped before opening the flame. The metal was cold against my palm. I slipped it into my pocket and stood there in the gravel, watching the spot where my father's truck had been, until the wind picked up and the snow began to blur the tracks. The wind had eased by the time I reached the main road, leaving only a thin ribbon of snow drifting along the shoulder. I drove without turning on the radio, letting the silence settle in the cab like a familiar weight. The lighter in my pocket tapped against my leg every time the truck bounced over a crack in the asphalt, a small reminder of the man who had handed it to me without a word. Dawn came slowly, a pale wash of blue over the hills, and I kept driving until the sun cleared the ridge and turned the snowfields into fading silver. By afternoon, the highway opened into long stretches of empty country. The storm had passed, but the air still held that sharp November bite that got into the bones. Somewhere outside Billings, I pulled over at a rest stop and sat for a while, hands resting on the wheel, watching trucks roll past with their steady hum. The world kept moving, even when everything inside me felt paused. I took the note my father had left out of my pocket and read it again, the handwriting uneven from age or pain. I folded it slowly and slipped it back, then started the truck and headed north. Montana greeted me with clouds stacked low over the fields. By the time I turned down the gravel road toward my place, the sun was already sinking, and the sky had gone that soft gray that comes before night. The house looked smaller than I remembered, maybe because I had spent days carrying things I still didn't know how to set down. I stepped inside and hung my coat by the door. The kitchen was cold, and still the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breath. I set a small turkey breast on the counter, not sure if I would actually cook it, but I kept moving anyway. Sometimes motion is the only way to keep from sinking. The storm picked up again, after dark flakes ticking against the windows like distant footsteps. I sliced vegetables without thinking, letting the knife and the rhythm do the work. When the oven clicked on, the house warmed just a little enough for the smell of rosemary and butter to settle in the air. For a moment it felt almost like the old holidays, the ones before distance and silence carved long lines through my family. I set 2 plates out of habit, then put one back and stood there with the other in my hand until my grip loosened. A knock broke the quiet. It was soft at first, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. I opened the door and found Danny standing in the snow, hair-damp jacket, dusted white. He held a grocery store turkey tray under one arm. A small boy clung to his pant leg, staring up at me with eyes too familiar to ignore. The cold came in around them sharp and clean. Danny shifted his weight and let out a breath. "Dad, this is Eli." The boy stepped forward when Danny nudged him gently. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Hi." I knelt down to his level. "Hi there. You must be hungry." He nodded, and I saw a hint of a smile before he tucked his face against Danny's leg again. I stood and moved aside, letting them in. Snow melted off their boots onto the entry rug. Danny set the tray on the counter and looked around the kitchen, as if trying to remember how it used to feel. "Smells like you didn't forget how to cook," he said with a quiet chuckle. I shrugged, unsure what to do with my hands. "You drove a long way." "Yeah," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I figured it was time. We talked while we ate, not in full conversations, more in small pieces layered between Eli's questions and the clatter of silverware. Danny asked about the roads, about the truck, about little things that had nothing to do with the weight between us. And I answered them, not pushing, not trying to steer the moment into anything larger than it was willing to give. Eli ate with both hands, dropping crumbs everywhere, and Danny shook his head with a tired smile. At one point, Danny looked at me, really looked as if checking for something he had carried in his mind for years. I met his eyes and didn't look away. He cleared his throat and rested his palms on the table. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "Me neither," I answered. Eli swung his legs under the chair and asked where Great-Grandpa Bob lived. Danny froze, but the boy kept going, unaware of the tenderness in the air. "Does he have a dog?" he asked. "Or a cabin?" I set down my fork and breathed out slowly. He used to work in places with big machines and long nights. He's somewhere safe now. "Is he coming to Thanksgiving?" Eli asked. I reached over and tucked a napkin under his plate. "Not this year, buddy." The boy accepted it easily, the way children do, and went back to his food. Danny watched him for a while, then looked at me again. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a worn kind of sadness that had started to loosen its grip. After dinner, I cleared the table while Danny helped Eli into a clean shirt. When I wiped the last bit of gravy off the surface, my hand drifted toward the photograph of Helen on the shelf. The frame leaned slightly to one side, the way it always had. Next to it lay my father's note. The edges curled from being in my pocket too long. I picked it up and held it beside her picture. For the first time, the two pieces didn't feel like reminders of what I had lost. They felt like a way forward, a quiet acceptance of the truth that had taken years to reach me. Danny walked back into the kitchen and stood beside me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. We both looked at the photograph, then at the note, and something eased between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close, something steady. Eli ran in and tugged at my sleeve. "Can we go outside and see the snow?" "In a minute," I said. "Let's get your boots on first." He nodded and dashed off. Danny let out a small laugh, the kind that comes from deep inside, surprised and warm. I folded the note and placed it gently beside the photograph, letting my hand rest there for a moment. The kitchen lights cast a soft amber glow over the table, the counters, the empty plates. Outside, the snow kept falling quiet and steady. Danny opened the door so Eli could step onto the porch. Cold air swept in, carrying the clean scent of winter. I followed them out, watching the boy reach his hands toward the sky, trying to catch the flakes before they touched the ground. Danny looked over at me. "Glad we came," he said. I nodded, feeling the truth settle in my chest, like a slow, warm breath. The wind shifted, brushing across the yard, smoothing the snow into gentle curves. I stood there in the quiet, listening to the soft crunch of Eli's boots and the faint hum of the house behind us. And for the first time in a long while, the night felt wide open, as if something lost had found its way back without making a sound.